Hey y'all, Tom, ND3N here, just like it says on the hat, and thanks for dropping by my little shack in the corner for a ham shack chat. Now, I have to start this with an apology. At points during this video, I'm going to rant. And that's because I've seen a lot of what I consider bad information being put out to new hams. And we'll talk about that later. And hopefully I can hold my rants down to something less than a Cat 4 hurricane. So in this video, I'm going to tell you what kinds of radios to avoid as your first rig and why you should avoid them. And I'm hoping that you'll take my advice. And if you're a more experienced ham, when somebody asks you this same question, I know you've been asked it, that you consider my answer. Then we're going to discuss a few things that may help the new ham determine what their first radio should be. But first, I'm going to tell you a short story about a hidden treasure that I found that triggered this entire video. A couple of weeks ago, I needed a cable. And I knew there was a box that I hadn't unpacked from my move a few years ago, well, like 3 years ago now, that contained a lot of extra cables that I just had stashed away. So I went out to my garage, found that box, and in the process of digging out the cable, I noticed a few things on the bottom of the box that I had completely forgotten that I owned. The first thing I pulled out was a Yaesu FT60R FM dual band handheld radio. Now, I've mentioned this particular radio in the past. This was the radio, and if you remember the story, if you've seen I've talked about it in several videos. But this was the radio that I was wearing using the belt clip while I did some work on my roof. Well, it came off my belt clip, it fell to the roof, slid down the roof, went over the edge to my cement driveway about 10 feet below that. As I climbed down the ladder, I was expecting to find a hot mess. But instead, aside from one small scratch down in the corner that you really have to look to see, there didn't appear to be any damage. And I was able to make a contact through our local repeater immediately. I gave it a few other checks and fields, and everything worked. I was absolutely amazed, and it sold me on the build quality of Yaesu radios. Those things are built like a tank. Well, I had assumed that I had loaned it out, sold it. If I sold it, it would have been to make money to buy another radio. So it was quite an experience for me to find it again and to find it perfectly operational. I also found an extra battery for it and the desktop charger. The next thing I pulled out of the bottom of the box was a beautiful Vibraplex paddle. And I also found not one, but two Winkeer USBs. Fantastic little devices if you want to control your keying through a computer. Now, out of all of those that I found, the one that had upset me the most and I was very frustrated because I couldn't find it was the Vibraplex Clear. It was a gift from my wife for Christmas back a few years ago. But the first year I was out here, and the last time they had it, I went to the Dayton Hamvention, which, by the way, is about 40 miles away from my house. So I didn't have to worry about a hotel or anything. But I bought a replacement paddle that I like, but I like my pretty silver paddle a lot more. Mostly because it came from my wife. All in all, it was about $500 worth of stuff. Now, let me share with you another little vignette that I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. about every 6 months or so, I take a look at my cellular plan and consider changing providers. When researching alternate providers, the first thing I do is consider the cost difference. You know how that is. You get a flyer or you see an ad on the TV. It says, hey, yeah, we're going to give you unlimited talk and text and 14 terabytes of data every week, and we're going to charge you $2.50 for it. Well, I haven't switched across yet. Mostly because the next thing I do after I check the cost is I look at the coverage map. And most of them just don't have the coverage that I need. I do a lot of travel, to include international travel, and my plan has got me covered on just about all of that. So, I suppose I should get to the meat of the video, and I will try to hold the rants down. Despite what many new hams are told about what their first radio should be, it is my opinion, and my opinion only, your mileage may vary, that new hams, except under specific circumstances, should not purchase a handheld or HT for their first radio. Let me tell you why. The first reason is that you may not be able to use them very well from your location. Unless you're in an area with a lot of hams, a populated area, and a lot of repeaters, you may be only to reach a single repeater, maybe two if you're lucky. In my town, that's what I can get with my HTs. I can get 2 repeaters. They're both owned by the same guy. One's a UHF, one's a VHF, and they're on the same antenna tower. The second reason is that even if you're able to reach a repeater, or even if you're lucky enough to live in an area where you have multiple options on repeaters, finding someone available to talk to may prove very difficult. From my home station, I can only hit one repeater reliably on my HT, and I can count on one hand the number of QSOs I've had on that repeater in the last 2 years. Now, one of the main reasons I purchased the FT991A, other than just having a good backup radio, was because it has VHF and UHF capabilities. Now on that, on the 991 with an external antenna and running 50 watts, I have over 20 repeaters programmed into the memories, and I'm able to contact each one of them. I wouldn't bother putting something in a memory if I couldn't use it. I can reliably hit each of the repeaters that I have programmed. Now, usually during the day, this is not only my ham shack, it is my telework location. So, being a good teleworking ham, I turn my 991A on and set it to scan those repeaters. And only occasionally, like maybe once every 2 hours, I will hear any activity on them. They seem most active during the morning and afternoon drive times. Now, all that said, there are certainly times when a handheld radio can be useful. However, these times are few and far between. I own, including the one that I just found, 3 HTs. Now, one of them has APRS, and if I'm going someplace for work or a weekend outing to do some hiking or to visit the zoo or out to a local park or something, I will usually take that radio with me so I can map my locations. Occasionally, just for giggles, I'll grab an HT if I know I'm going to be in a radioactive area, like a club meeting, a ham fest, or field day site, things like that. But even then, I very rarely use them. Yeah, they're turned on, but I'm not actively using them. To me, it's more like a badge that identifies me as a ham than a useful piece of gear. Now, as you can tell, I have very little use for handheld radios. Yeah, you should have clued in on that early on in the video when I told you about finding a radio that I had misplaced for several years. I didn't miss it, and I didn't lose any sleep over not having it. I can honestly tell you that I would feel the same for any of my HTs. The only thing I would miss is the money that I spent on buying them. If after all of that, and I do apologize for my rant, you still want to purchase a handheld radio as your first rig, I do have a couple of suggestions for you. The first thing you'll want to do is to find out how many repeaters are located in your area. For this, I recommend that you download the Repeater Book app. Great app, available on both Android and Apple stores. Set it to search for FM repeaters within 10 miles of your location. And I'll tell you, 10 miles sometimes can be stretching it. And make sure there are a few of them that will be available to you. I'd recommend at least 3 or 4, but your mileage may vary. Like I said, where I live, I got one that's reliable. Next, talk to hams in the area. You can tell who's a ham. They'll be the guy walking through the grocery store or the hardware store with a little radio strapped on their belt. At least if you're looking for me. Talk to them, find out which repeaters are active in their area and in use. Ask if the repeaters are used by a club for a weekly or at least periodic net that you can check into. Ask what the best time to make a contact on that repeater would be. And while you're at it, ask them about the local club, what activities they sponsor, when and where the meetings are, and how to join. Being a member of a local club is one of the most useful things that any new ham can do. You can get information off social media. You can look things up on Google. You can look for videos on YouTube. But being able to sit down with a guy who owns the radio that you're interested in, maybe get an invite to his shack to see what's going on with it, that's something you're not going to get from social media. Also, if you don't mind me continuing my rant just a little bit, if you decide you want an HT for your first rig, please, please, please do not buy a cheap Chinese radio. Now, I used to teach graduate level operations and management classes. So I have a few creds in that area. So let's look at this Chinese radios that are available, especially the really cheap ones, from a business perspective. So if you purchase a radio from a dealer that costs $50, that dealer usually has a pretty decent markup, as much as 50 to 100%. So let's say that they paid $35 for the radio. Now, I won't descend into a long-winded discussion of supply chain management, although I could. But that means that the manufacturer needed to manufacture and transport that radio to the dealer. Now that includes import and export fees, parts, labor, engineering and design, and a myriad of other costs for under $35 per radio in order to make a profit. Now granted, they're selling millions of them, but still, it's a big hurdle to get over if you're not making but a few pennies per radio, which if you look at everything, that's what they're making. Now, they got to cut their costs someplace, and unfortunately, they cut their costs on you, to your not benefit. These radios are mass-produced in factories that employ near slave wage workers, using the lowest quality parts that they can get away with and still call their product a radio. And they reverse engineer the design of the radio and the software from the more quality manufacturers. As a matter of fact, a lot of them are Yaesu knockoffs. These radios will be a disappointment to you. I can tell you, I've known several new hams who had these radios and either gave them away or tucked them away in a drawer and never used them again after a couple of weeks. So what should you get as a first radio? Now, if you don't want to, or maybe you just can't upgrade your license, but you want to get your voice out over the air, you should consider a mobile VHF and UHF rig. Now, you can use it in your car or have it in a home base station. In the car, you'll be in a good position to chat with other hams during their commutes, assuming that your commute and theirs coincide. At home, with a good outside antenna, the added repeaters that you can hit will provide you more opportunities to find a QSO. For your first rig, I would suggest focusing, and this is even if you decide to go with an HT, focusing on FM only radios. Avoid the digital voice modes and avoid a lot of the bells and whistles. An FM radio is a much lower cost and can be sold after a few months for almost what you paid for it. And let me emphasize on that almost. I'd say you could get 70 to 80% of whatever you spent on the radio back. And you'll sell it quick. In that time, you will have had the chance to speak to other local hams about additional bells and whistles and digital voice modes available to you in your area, and you can make an intelligent decision. If you can move up your license class to general or even extra, then start saving your pennies. And that's in a short order of time. I'm not saying wait for a year, but if you can knock it out in a couple weeks, do it. Save your pennies, study for the test, and pick up an inexpensive HF rig. Put up a dipole antenna. You can rig one of those yourselves and get on the air that way. I put out a series of videos about rig cost that might be of interest to you. The link up here in the corner will take you to rigs between $1,000 and $2,000, and then once you get there, if you look at the video description, there are links to the other videos in the series, which include HF rigs under $1,000, rigs between $2,000 and $4,000, and HF rigs over $4,000. So, I promise, that's the end of my rant. I hope you appreciate my recommendations and suggestions, but as always, the final choice will be up to you. I respect your choices. I never play the I told you so card. My opinions, and that's all they are based in over 3 decades of experience as an instructor, a volunteer examiner, and an owner of too many rigs to count. Some of the rigs I've loved, some I haven't been too thrilled with, and you probably know what I think about my collection of HTs. Thanks for dropping by my little shack in the corner. For a Ham Shack chat, please give me a like by popping that thumbs up icon. And please share this with your friends who might appreciate the content. Please leave a comment down below with any questions or suggestions. And I do try to reply to all comments as quickly as possible, but certainly within 24 hours. As always, at your service. 7-3 till next time, I'm Tom, ND3N, and I'm out.